So, have you ever sat down to meditate on compassion and your mind becomes engulfed with blistering rage? Okay, some people shaking their head. That just happened to me. So, it's a very good reminder of how unpredictable and unstable my mind is at this point. 10 times or 9 times out of 10, the mind can be very calm and inspired and bright, but oh dear, just out of nowhere sometimes, rage can arise. And I think it's really good to see this. So maybe it has something to do with the fact that the topic of my BBC is identifying the difference between anger and compassion.
This is in the context of how I react to social injustice out in the world and my own instances of suffering.
And one may think that this is kind of obvious, and sometimes, or maybe even often, it is. But when I actually look at how I react to when suffering arises, either in my own mind or out in the world, there's often really a mixture of the two. And they can alternate very quickly in my mind. So it can be very difficult for me to discern what is actually driving my behavior in response to the suffering that I see. And I've noticed that sometimes when I take steps to subdue the anger, then the urgency and the potency of my response kind of dwindles away. You know, if I'm just left with the compassion, there's a lack of vitality there. So I recognize that anger creates this great energy field that I would really like to learn how to channel into compassion. I want to say transform, transmute the energy of anger into compassion, but I think that's a little bit beyond where I am at this point. But just to get more clear, I think would be quite helpful. So, yeah, as I mentioned, they share some similarities. Compassion and anger are very decisive and very clear. They both have a very clear goal of wanting to end suffering. And they have this energy of wanting to do something. You know, you don't just sit there, you want to get up and change the situations so that you can make things better for everybody. But the key difference is the methods that anger and compassion use to go about this task. And anger is usually involving rejection or resistance. That's sort of the MO. And this is because anger is grasping at an inherently existent and solid self, confronting inherently existent solid suffering caused by an inherently existent solid of other. And so that, energy of just tension and tightness really derails any kind of, I think, wisdom or creativity or gentleness that arises when we try and go about addressing that suffering. And we may be able to stop the source of our, or the, not the ultimate source, but the condition for our anger in that moment if we react through the energy of anger. But in the long term, it won't really achieve what we want. We'll end up hurting someone else, most likely, or we'll end up hurting ourselves by planting karmic seeds for future suffering. And we just reinforce this habit of reacting with anger. And in contrast, and this is what I think the practice of Chenrezi has been so helpful for me to see, is that compassion responds to suffering not with anger, resistance, rejection, but with acceptance and inclusion. And this is a whole different energy vibe that it brings to difficult situations. Compassion definitely wants to end suffering, but it doesn't want to do it in a way that makes an enemy out of anybody or out of anything. It recognizes that all beings are suffering. And with this more equanimous attitude, suffering can recognize that, or I'm sorry, compassion can recognize that suffering has causes. It's not something that's inevitable, it's not something that's random, it's not a punishment. There are very specific causes for each instance of suffering, and something can be done about that. And because of this, there's that element of spaciousness, of creativity, even patience can arise. And I think patience is a really key element in compassion that is definitely lacking in anger. So I've been thinking a lot about how the image of Chenrezi visually depicts how to approach suffering in a skillful way. And to me, she looks like a lotus rising out of the mud of suffering. And they say that the one good thing about samsara is that it can end. Well, I think likewise, the one good thing about suffering is that a Chenrezi can arise out of it. And anger um, often makes my head feel like it is going to explode. Um, but that's not why Chenrezi has so many heads. Even though I got that origin story with Tara mixed up, I actually thought that she had so many heads because she looked at the hell realms that she had just emptied and they were all back there. No, that's actually how Tara was born when Chenrezi's tear rose from seeing all those beings back in hell. So, as we can see, Chenrezi's face is not grimacing or growling or frowning, and most of the other ones are not either. He's not shoving a face in the finger of suffering, so I'm going to bomb you back to the Stone Age, like some other public figures we are familiar with. And instead, he wears a very peaceful smile. And this is because he knows that hatred, anger, resistance merely feeds suffering. They're suffering's food. And also, why can Chenrezi look at being suffering and still smile? Is he or she some kind of sadist? Or is she just kind of in denial? No, again, it's because Chenrezi's wisdom knows that there are causes for this suffering. And she, better than anybody, is fully equipped to respond to those causes of suffering with the 1,000 arms and the 1,000 hands. Yeah, that peaceful smile and those gentle eyes remind us that acceptance and love are actually what's needed to transform suffering at its root. And this is especially the case when it comes to people, I have found. If I don't accept who another person is, um, in the sense of I don't kick them out of my heart, saying, you are inherently flawed, you're unworthy of love, I'll never be able to influence them in a positive way. I notice myself responding to people's harmful behaviors in a way that I think actually does maybe stop what's happening in the moment. But if I do it with anger or with judgment, it totally poisons the whole thing. So while I may agree with what I did or said objectively, that emotion tone just has completely derailed everything, and I still regret doing what I decided to do. And this comes up a lot in nonviolent communication. It teaches us that preserving connection is really the most important objective in any interaction with another person. It's not getting them to change or getting ourselves to change. It's trying to establish and preserve that connection, letting the other person know that we care about them and that we're on their side. And in the long run, this is really what will lead to a beneficial outcome for everybody. And it may not be what we thought we wanted in that moment, but lo and behold, with compassion, this creativity, this playfulness, this a new solution can emerge that is better than anything we could have brought by ourselves. So going back to the imagery of Chenrezi, the eyes, the hands, the arms are wide open. Chenrezi doesn't flip the channel when he sees suffering. She doesn't go, oh money pay me, oh money pay me, oh money pay me, oh money pay me, oh money pay me. When she sees suffering, which I am want to do, um, she's able to just stand up straight and face suffering head on, and not just one direction, all directions. She's totally fearless when it comes to facing suffering. And then I was thinking that the nectar pouring from the vase is, it's like water that's putting out the fire of our anguish and our rage. I know it's mainly intended for the hungry ghosts, but I think there's plenty of craving and despair to go around in all the realms. And it reminded me of how after a forest fire, if it's put out, then all of these new shoots and this new growth can arise that makes things healthier than before. And that's what Chenrezi's nectar can do. And then the ornaments that she wears remind us that the real royalty are those who put aside their own self interest to care about the welfare of others. That being said, this retreat has really shown me that the best place for me to turn towards suffering is not on the news. It's within my own heart and mind. And it's really shocking, actually, to see just how much suffering there is. I've had a lot more bodily suffering this time. Okay, I take that back. I've had a lot of back pain the past few retreats, but now there's leg pain and there's stomach pain and there's chest pain. And I don't think this is anything new. I think it's been there all along. I've read in other places that actually we're in tremendous suffering most of the time. We just don't know it. We have gotten so good at distracting ourselves and blocking things out, going numb, shutting down, that it takes an environment like a retreat to really reveal what's been there all along. And it's hard to be thankful for it at the time, but always you have to see what's there before you can do anything about it. So, usually, what do we want to do when we see suffering? We repress it, we deny it, we pretend it's not there, we sugarcoat it, we downplay it, we avoid it, we reject it, we suppress it, and we distract ourselves. But the radical thing about Buddhism is that it teaches us to turn towards that suffering. This is what the Buddha called on all of us to do by recognizing the First Noble Truth. And this, as I'm sure you all know, is not easy. I've also read somewhere that Buddhism is actually never going to be the world's most popular religion. And I think it's exactly for this reason. It's because it recognizes the hard fact of life, which is that, ouch, you know, from the grossest levels to the subtlest levels, there is unsatisfactoriness, there is suffering there. And we need all the help we can get to face this if we're going to do something about it. And that's what Chenrezi can do. She or he can support us in this monumental task that human beings are best equipped to do, but oh boy, is it still quite something else, quite something unlike we've ever done. And without the energy that Chenrezi brings, the tranquility and the kindness, our mind is just too agitated to see the real sources of our suffering, which is not the jerk out there, and it's not the weather, and it's not my back pain. It's believing that there's an inherently existent me that is experiencing this suffering. It's seeing pain not as just a temporary phenomenon that arises, abides, and ceases. It's seeing I am having a pain, and this pain will go on forever. So Chenrezi's posture, he also represents the composure that we need to look at those real causes and then begin the hard work of digging them up, putting on the weed sprayer backpack with 1,000 different little sprayers and going around and zapping all those different causes of suffering, or pulling them up by the hand. And I think she looks like she has a really strong back, so that should be helpful. So I guess to close, Chenrezi's gentle appearance invites us to stop abhorring, demonizing, and condemning our suffering to death by firing squad. As Thich Nhat Hanh has been fond of saying, suffering is to be approached like a crying baby, picked up, soothed, and healed. And compassion may temporarily appear as wrathful if that's what's most skillful, but it never loses the inner calm and goodwill that are really within themselves great antidotes to suffering and the precursors to the wisdom that can help us uproot it once and for all. And then once we let go of the self, we can hold everyone and everything with great compassion.